Good morning, everyone. Welcome you joining today's class, Savor at Home and Learn, Natural Hazard Disclosures, What's New in the Industry. Happy June and happy Tuesday, right? And today is a reopen for our California and Los Angeles County. Welcome everyone in the true life, real life. Thank you. And I'm Pauline Lam from Cotai Realty, your 2021 Co-Chair Education Committee, Western Gable Valley Realtors. A friendly reminder, all participants will be muted during the meeting. Should you have any questions, please text your question into the chat box. Speaker will answer your questions during the Q&A section. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the YouTube channel, Western Gable Valley Realtors. Today, I'm so glad to invite our beautiful Sylvia Rosage. And Sylvia is our co-chair, co-vice chair this year, Education Committee, to introduce our very, very special speaker, Sage Gomez, and our special speaker, Scott Roeklein. Sylvia, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our Safe at Home and Learn event. Today we have our speaker, very young speaker, Sage Gomez, to introduce Scott Roeklein. She's from my NHD, and we're going to hear more about the AB 38 and on how NHD reports help, when to use the CAR form HHDA, how hazard zones affect a real estate transaction. And I don't know about you, but I read the whole resume of our speaker today. So I will let Sage introduce her speaker today, but I just wanted to give you a little brief on Sage. She is very young in this field, but she's doing it very strongly. She's predominantly covers the San Gabriel Valley area and is building strong relationships with all of us in this industry. She looks forward to assisting everyone and the natural disclosures. And to you, here she is, Sage Gomez.
Thank you, Sylvia. My name is Sage Gomez. I'm your affiliate chair at the Western Gabriel board this year for 2021. A little bit about me. I've been in the industry for 2.5 years now. About a year of that has been in COVID, so we are getting back to normal, which is great. And I'm very lucky to be a part of this board. And I'm going to introduce my friend Scott, because he has a great background and we rely on him for everything. He's the best.
Well, thank you, Sage. Yeah, don't let her young looks, her youthfulness fool you. She knows this industry very well, and she'll take care of all of you. And so my name's Scott Roeklein. I work for my NHD, and I've been in the NHD industry for, gosh, over 20 years now. I actually founded the NHD division at First American Title Company and ran that for quite a few years. I started my own business and ran it for a number of years, and then merged my company with my NHD, and we've been going strong ever since. So obviously I look a little older than Sage. I've been doing this a long time. So we're going to talk about, excuse me, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And we're going to do some refresher over the hazard layers in the NHD report that affect the valley. I actually have the maps of the valley. And then we're going to go in a little more detail on AB 38, the new laws and how it affects all of you. So I'm going to start sharing my screen right now. All right, so here we go. So the first slide I like to show is, I get asked a lot of questions about the hazard layers in California and how prevalent they are. And as you can see in this slide, 83% of the state is in some sort of earthquake, flood, or wildland fire zone. So obviously this is something that we live with in California. I call it the price we pay to live in paradise. The next slide I'm going to show you is specifically, let me back up, specifically the high and very high fire hazard zones throughout the state. And like I said, we have this new AB 38 we're going to talk a lot about today. But this gives you an idea of this, how prevalent these fire zones are and where they're located. And obviously with, the area has been warming up, and there's been a significant number of wildfires in the last few years. The Cal Fire and the state of California is paying close attention, and that's why these new laws are taking place in order to help deal with the potential damage that these wildfires can cause. So let's get into some refresher. First of all, the NHD industry. This is a sale-only industry, so these NHD reports are required on all transactions, all sale transactions. There's no exclusion. So if you have a transaction, if you're a listing agent, you have a listing, you're going to require an NHD report be provided to any potential buyer. So just understand that, and that includes even vacant land. And jumping into now the hazard layers themselves, the reports consist of flood zones, fire zones, and seismic zones. So this map shows you for the valley area where the special flood hazard area resides. So all the blue shaded areas, the blue lines, those are all the flood zones that exist in the valley. All right. So you can see typically these are lower lying areas, and also a lot of the lines are drainage areas. So the flood zones are determined based on a 1% chance of an area being flooded by 1 foot of water over a 100-year period. So in California, it's dry most of the year. Then it rains for a couple days, and you get this flash flooding effect that affects all the drainage areas. And that's where you're going to find these special flood hazard zones. Right. And when you look at the maps, we are incredibly accurate. Our maps look at each individual parcel to make these determinations that we put into the report. And I like showing this slide because I get asked a lot from agents, how is it that the property I'm representing on this side of the street's in a flood zone, but the property on the other side of the street is not? And it's because these maps, these satellite imagery maps we get from FEMA are so precise that they're literally parcel specific. And this slide shows you just how we make those determinations regarding the flood zones. So the question of the day, I look at my NHD report and the property is in the special flood hazard zone. What does it mean? What does it mean to me? What does it mean if I'm an agent and I'm representing a buyer? Well, if the property you're representing is going to require a mortgage to close escrow and the property is in the special flood hazard zone, then quite simply your buyer is going to be required to purchase flood insurance in addition to their property casualty policy. So what I say to agents all the time is whenever you're representing a client and they're interested in a property that's in a flood zone, have them contact their insurance company as early as possible. I'm sure you guys have an insurance affiliate, right? Have them contact your affiliate, let them find out the insurance requirements and the premiums as early in the transaction as possible, so they don't get close to escrow closing and then determine they have a large insurance bill that's going to be necessary on that property, right? Let them find that out early, right? So that's the special flood hazard zone. There's actually 2 zones that we look at. The second zone is called an area of potential flooding. As you can see, this zone is much more prevalent in the valley, right? You can see all these shaded areas. So area of potential flooding, these are properties that are downstream from dams throughout California, and we have to map the dam based on being completely full, and if the dam were to disappear where that water runs, that's how we map this zone on the NHD report. You can see there's a significant number of dams throughout LA County that is holding a lot of water, and if these dams were to breach, the map shows where the water is going to run. So there's a lot of properties that are in this area of potential flooding, right? And again, here's a very good close-up map showing how one parcel can be in the zone, the parcel that your property abuts to can be out of the zone. We're really specific and accurate with our determinations. So again, the impact of area of potential flooding, again, your buyer may be required to purchase flood insurance on properties in this area of potential flooding. Again, anytime you're dealing with a property in a flood zone, have your buyer contact their insurance company to determine the insurance requirements and premiums, okay? So that's the 2 flood zones. So we're gonna save the fire zones for later. So I'm gonna move forward to seismic zones that we have to look at in the NHD report. And the first is what we call the earthquake fault zone. All right. So we have to map 1/8 of a mile on either side of a known active fault. And these are all the brown lines that are running through the valley here. You can see where all the active faults are located. All right. And so there's a lot of faults that actually drift through this area. And as you can see, the star in the middle of the screen shows you where the Northridge epicenter was from years past, that horrible earthquake. So there's a lot of faults that run off of that. So again, we map on 1/8 of a mile on either side of these active faults. In addition, we have to look at where the landslide areas are. All right, so these are properties that are built on hillsides, on slopes, or at the base of slopes where when the earth starts shaking due to an earthquake, the earth can settle or slide and cause an impact to those properties. So as you would expect on all the hillsides surrounding the valley, that's where you're going to find the landslide areas. And then the last of the seismic items we have to map are what we call the liquefaction areas. And so these are typically valley areas. These are more on the base, the bottom areas in the valley where you're building on compacted soils. And so liquefaction is where a solid substance like compacted soils start acting more like a liquid and settle unevenly when the ground starts shaking. All right, so that's all the green shaded areas. So again, the question for these seismic areas, what's the impact? I'm representing a buyer and properties in one of these seismic zones. Well, the good news is there's no impact to an existing property. Resale transaction is not impacted by these seismic zones because Sacramento realized they can't force the entire state of California to retrofit to current earthquake codes from a building perspective, right? So it's not going to impact the resale, but the impact will be if you're representing a buyer that's looking to buy vacant land and build their home, or maybe even more commonly, you're representing a flipper who's looking to buy a property and do a tear down and rebuild, right? So being in these zones is going to affect new construction because the construction codes are significantly stricter when you're close to an active fault, or you're building on a hillside, or you're building on soft compacted soils. So the takeaway here for you, the agent, is when you're working with a client that's going to purchase property to build on it, have them contact the city to find out the construction codes and the restrictions. It's even possible that properties in an active fault zone will not be allowed to build on them because the cities just think it's not safe. So anytime property's in a seismic zone, your client's going to be doing some construction, have them contact the city offices to find out restrictions. Okay. So now let's circle back to the fire zones. And these are the zones that are impacted now with this new Assembly Bill 38. And so this map shows you the high and very high fire zones in and out of the state responsibility areas, along with, in green, the local fire zones from the city and county of LA, right? And so the one new change for us in NHD company is that we now we no longer can just map the state fire zones. We have to also include the local zones for you, our clients, in our determinations, because the law requires it now. AB 38 requires local fire zones. So here you can see all the surrounding areas where there's a high or very high risk of fires, right? And as you would imagine, these are the wooded areas that surround the valley, right? The wooded and grassy areas that surround the valley, right? So that's where the zones exist, okay? And here's the point, right? So when you look at this slide, and this is a property in the city of LA, it's north of Hollywood, okay? On a state level, as you can see the yellow circle, this parcel is not in fire zone. When you look at the LA County fire map on the right, you can see obviously this property is in a fire zone. So as far as this new Assembly Bill 38 is concerned, we have to say, yes, this property is impacted and potentially you're required for these new AB 38 disclosures, right? So this is why those local maps are important. And I bring this up because not every NHD company is using local maps in their report, okay? Very important that you check with your NHD provider. Now, obviously my NHD, we have all the local maps. I'm going to show you our report pages in a second, but not every company does. So if you're using somebody different, you have to ask them, I need to see the local maps to make sure I'm in compliance, all right? So what does it mean being in these fire zones? So first of all, it may be difficult for your buyer to obtain property insurance, right? And that insurance is going to be expensive. So anytime you're dealing with a property in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, again, have your buyer contact immediately to find out if they can get a policy from their current provider and what that policy is going to cost. And it's possible that their current provider may not, issue a policy. I've been a farmer's customer for 30 years. We just moved up to a town of Springville, which is at the base of the Sequoia National Forest. I'm in a very high fire hazard severity zone, and we couldn't get fire insurance through farmers. We had to go through the California Fair Plan, which is the last bullet. So there is a state subsidized California insurance company called the Fair Plan that will provide insurance to properties in these high fire hazard zones, okay? So again, remember, any property in these high fire hazard zones besides AB 38 are gonna have expensive fire insurance. So let's talk about AB 38. So effective January 1st, this bill supplements the existing high and very high fire hazard zones within the state responsibility areas, now meaning you have to include the local level, the local fire zones as well. And effective July 1st, which is coming up very quickly, there's a defensible space section that becomes effective, right? So what this means to you now, since January 1st, both state and local level high and very high fire hazard severity zones must be disclosed. There's a new home hardening and defensible law. And by the way, this law does not appear on the NHD signature page, right? The law exists, but it doesn't show on the NHD signature page. But all sellers of older properties, these are pre-2010 and high and very high fire hazard severity zones, have additional information to disclose regarding property improvements dealing with fire safety, right? And there is a new CAR form for this purpose. The original CAR form was Form HHDA. That was effective from January 1st to June 30th. Now there's a new CAR form, Fire Hardening Defensible Space Advisory Disclosure and Addendum, CAR form FHDS, which is now in effect for properties closing July 1st and after, right? So I just said that you don't see anything on the natural hazard disclosure statement. This is the signature page of our NHD report. It's the signature page that's in every NHD report. And as you can see, highlighted by that red circle, this property on a state level is not in a very high fire hazard severity zone, all right? And this is the page that has to be signed by the seller to seller's agent and the buyer. So how would you know if the property is in a local fire zone, which affects AB 38? Well, you go to the next page in our report, which is the Natural Hazard Disclosure Report Summary. And all you see at the top, it's not in the high fire hazard severity zone, but in the middle, you can see supplemental fire hazard severity zone AB 38, yes. So we'll tell you right on our disclosure summary page if the property qualifies for the new AB 38 disclosures, right? We make it simple for you. So just go to our summary page and we'll tell you AB 38, yes or no, all right? So in this case, it's yes, because if you look on the next page, the property is located in a supplemental fire hazard zone, okay? So on a local level, this property is in a fire zone. Okay, so what does this mean? So first of all, the triggers for using the new CAR form, and these are for residential properties only, was the property built prior to January 1st of 2010? So that date is important because the construction codes in the state of California changed on 1/1 of 2010, which included all these home hardening items we're going to talk about. So if the property is older than 1/1 of 2010 and it's in a higher, very high fire hazard severity zone based on the MyNHD report, then you have to fill out the home hardening portion of CAR form FHDS, right? And so the home hardening portion basically is where the seller is disclosing to the buyer if an older property in these higher, very high fire hazard severity zones has been retrofitted to help protect the property, the structure against fires, right? And so this list, and this list exists right on the form, which I'm going to show you, is basically you have to disclose a list of the following features that make the home vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers. So If none of the retrofits on these items have occurred, you have to check off each of these boxes, right? Eaves, soffits, roof ventilation, where the vents have openings in excess of 1/8 of an inch, right? Or not flame or ember resistant. Wooden roofs, if the property still has a wooden roof, you have to check this off if it hasn't been retrofitted. Combustible landscape or other materials within 5 feet of the home, right? Single pane or non-tempered glass, because single pane is more susceptible to the pressure from fires than multi-pane glass. Loose or missing bird stoppings or roof flashings, and rain gutters without metal or non-combustible gutter covers. So any one of these items, A through F, is right on the car form FHDS, and if it has not been retrofitted on a home built prior to 1/1/2010, you have to check off each of these boxes on the car form. Now, in addition, effective July 1st, the seller must provide to a buyer a document that shows compliance with Public Resource Code 4291 from the local jurisdiction regarding defensible space. So defensible space is where a property owner has to help clear the area around their home to make it harder for a fire to jump from where it's burning, from trees and brush, to your home itself. So I have to do this every year. I have to mow my yard up to 100 feet away from the house down to less than 4 inches. So any weeds, brush, anything has to be cut down to less than 4 inches. I have to cut down any limbs off of trees that are touching my roof or structure, right? My wood pile from my wood burning stove has to be more than 30 feet away from my property. I can't have combustible landscaping in that 30 feet range. And then my trees have to be spaced on the property so that the fire can't jump from tree to my home. So every year, CAL FIRE comes and inspects my property and gives me a certificate. And if I were to sell my home, that's the certificate that I would hand to any potential buyer to tell them that I've created defensible space that's been approved by the local fire department regarding my property, right? And there's a space on the new car form for this. So just to, again, talk about the triggers before I show you the form. The home hardening triggers are, and these are for residential properties, was the home built prior to 1/1/2010 and is the property as per the MINEC report in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. If yes to those 2 points, then you have to fill out the home hardening piece of Form FHDS. Defensible space on Form FHDS, the property for residential property simply has to be in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. And if that's the case, for any property that's going to close escrow on or after 7/1/2021, you have to fill out the defensible space portion of the form. So here's the old car form. This is car form HHDA, which is only in effect till 6/30/2021, and it only dealt with home hardening. Okay. So this form is becoming obsolete. The new form, FHDS, here it is, right? Item number 1 is home hardening disclosure. Item number 2, you either leave it unchecked if the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone, or item 2, you check B if it is not. And then item 3 is if the property is in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone and it was built prior to January 1/2010, that's where on 3B, you have to check off any of the items that have not been retrofitted on the property, okay? And then section 4 is where you have to check who's going to be responsible for providing the defensible space certificate that the property is in compliance with defensible space. And this is now a 2-page form. And regarding defensible space, you can negotiate because you may have a buyer that lives in the wooded area and is just buying a home in the local area, buying another property, and they understand defensible space. And it's possible the home buyer may say, you know what, I'll take that responsibility on. I have a certain amount of time after escrow closes to, make sure I take care of defensible space. I'll do that. So you can negotiate that the actual seller makes that their responsibility. But if the seller doesn't want to, then if the buyer doesn't want to, then the seller has to do it themselves. The seller has to provide a certificate that they have complied with local laws, local fire department laws, creating defensible space, and they have to provide that certificate to any potential buyer. All right. So that's the form. So again, just summarizing, high or very high fire hazard severity zones. The property is in as per AB 38. We tell you that right off the MyNHC report. You must disclose where the home hardening retrofits have not taken place. There is a CAR form FHDS for that purpose. You also have to educate buyers about creating a defensible space and provide them certification that the property has been retrofitted, and go to the CAL FIRE website, readyforwildfire.org. All right, it talks in detail about defensible space. It talks in detail about home hardening. It's a really good website for information. So that's AB 38. Now, we talked during AB 38 about now how important local hazard zones are becoming, right? AB 38 now requires that we look at the local high and very high fire severity zones. There's also local flood and seismic zones. You know, sometimes the counties will have these zones, sometimes individual cities will have their own maps, right? And MyNHC has all the local zones in our report, because sometimes being in a local flood zone or a local seismic zone can affect whether permitting will be issued on a property if a buyer, a home buyer, or a homeowner is looking to, you know, do improvements on their property. Also, some of the counties of California are not even yet mapped on a state level. For example, like Riverside County is not yet mapped for landslide and liquefaction. So the local zones come into play here. So again, just remember, make sure the NHC company you're working with has the local hazard information in their report, all right? And MyNHC, rest assured, we have it, all right? So we're providing it to you. And here's an example. For example, here's an LA County flood and dam map, right? So this is much different than the state map, right? So we have to make determinations on any properties that are in these flood and dam inundation areas on a county level, right? Here's a local landslide map for the valley. So you can see it's very different than the state map. And again, we have to include the determinations on this local landslide map in the NHC report, right? So we're providing this information to you to make sure you're protected. Now, this slide is starting to talk about tax information. Everything prior to this is dealing with all the hazard layers, the flood zones, the fire zones, the seismic zones. The impact on flood zones is the potential for flood insurance. Fire zones, you know, the potential for fire insurance and expensive insurance. You know, the seismic zones affect new construction. But now we're getting into the specific tax requirements in the NHC report. And there are two specific tax disclosures that must be included. And the first one is whether a property is subject to Mello-Roos taxes or not, right? And so we give a separate page in our report that basically says subject property is or is not subject to Mello-Roos. And in this case, this property is not, right? The second of the required disclosures are what we call 1915 bonds, right? This is another assessment that is in addition to the property taxes. And in this case, you see the subject property is subject to 1915 bond. And so whenever a property is subject to one of these two bonds, if you look lower on the page, we then tell you what the bond is. We give you the definition. We tell you what the current levy is, right? And we also give you the expiration year, which is good to know. And this is good news for this particular property. This bond is expiring in 2021. So important information for you with regards to a client if the property is in either of these bond districts, you know, what the amount is with regards to taxes a buyer is going to have to pay and when this bond expires. In addition to these two required tax disclosures, we give you a tax roll based on when you order the report. So the day you order the report, we give you the current information, the current tax roll in the county treasury website, right? And so this is really good information. If you're having an open house on the weekend, you know, after price, the next two questions from your buyer, what are the taxes, where are the schools? So if you have the MyNHC report, you're going to have what the current tax roll lists. So it's not going to be exactly what the buyer is going to responsibility for taxes is going to be, but it's going to be very close. So this is a good estimation for a buyer that's trying to budget, you know, affordability on a home they're looking to purchase. Okay. So that's the tax information, which is included in every MyNHC report, right? So all the information, the hazard layers, the tax information is included in our standard report. If you need and require, which we recommend, the environmental information, that's what you're going to get when you purchase our premium report, right? So all these environmental disclosures they're reported differently than the hazard layers. The hazard information, the flood, the fire, the seismic zones, we tell you the property is in or not in those zones. With regards to the environmental information, we tell you a property's proximity to these sites. So we tell you how close the property is to them, right? Is it 1/8 of a mile, or how many of these sites are within 1/8 of a mile or 1/4 of a mile of the subject property, right? And by the way, all this environmental information is publicly available. You can go to like an EPA website and find this information out. And the point is to provide this detailed information to a buyer about these environmental sites, right? And providing it provides additional information for you, the agent, right? More is always better with disclosures. More is better. So the more information you provide, the smaller the chance a buyer can come back to you and say, you should have told me, right? That's the whole point of this, is providing this information. So I have some maps for the valley, right? So these are what we call leaking underground storage tanks and Circulus and Swiss sites. So these are sites where there's an industry that is using toxic chemicals that has to register those chemicals with the state or federal government. And the potential is that they've spilled some of those chemicals, so they go on the state or federal government website, right? And so the triangles, those are what we call leaking underground storage tanks. So these could be oil rigs or gas stations, right? And then the lavender circles are the Circulus and Swiss sites. So these are this is where there's manufacturing or use of chemicals taking place, right? Where there's been a spill. It could even be a dry cleaner, where the dry cleaner spilled some of the toxic chemicals they use during the dry cleaning process. So when that occurs, they go on to a website, which we pick up and put into our environmental report. All right, here's an aerial view of the leaking underground storage tanks, right? So those are the circles that you see, the green circles, upper left and lower right of this map. So you can see just how accurate we are when we look at these sites and how we can give you a very accurate proximity to a subject property. This map shows you the oil wells and also the high pressure gas pipelines in the area. So the pipelines are not the natural gas that is connected to homes. That's very low pressure gas lines. These are the high pressure propane or methane lines that run throughout California to transport this gas from one place to another, right? And then the little black with crosses, those are the oil wells that exist throughout the area. And then this is a map we have of SoCal gas sites, and the yellow circles are where there's been odor complaints regarding the gas. And as you can see, majority of them are smack dab around Porter Ranch, right? Which is no surprise, right? Everybody is aware of what happened in Porter Ranch. And so we include, right, the fact that these sites are in proximity to a property, right? Again, so a client can't come to tell you, the agent, hey, I smell gas, you should have told me. Well, actually, if you purchased the premium report, the buyer's signing it that you did tell them that there was a site that smelled of gas that was a 1/4 mile away from the property. So again, the whole point of these environmental sites, it's a proximity report to provide the information to any potential buyer, okay? So summarizing about us, every one of our reports is backed by $10 million in E&O insurance from a California insurance company. We don't charge if escrow doesn't close. This is why we always say to the agent, order at listing. If you're a listing agent, there's never a charge to you, the agent. Our pricing is excellent, all right? Remember, no charge. If it doesn't close, there's never a charge. And we provide 24-hour ordering and delivery. So again, the point is, you're a listing agent, it's Friday at 6 o'clock. Oh, I have an open house tomorrow. I wish I had the NAC report. You can go online and order one. You'll get it within an hour. That way you'll have the information you need. So that's just a little bit about us. We're as responsive as we possibly can be to help you with your needs. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen, and I want to turn it over Q&A, and specifically if there's any questions on Assembly Bill 38. So let me stop sharing, and let's, whoever's monitoring the chat box, why don't we see if there's any questions?
I just want to make one comment. Scott, thank you so much. That was amazing. You always do a great job at explaining everything within the report. I just want to reiterate, make sure to order your NHD at listing, especially with new fire hardening and defensible space form, because you're going to see that my NHD is going to tell you whether or not you are in a very high or high fire zone, and if you are in that local jurisdiction as well. And once again, like Scott said, order it at listing. There's no money up front whatsoever. And I think, Sylvia, we have one question in the chat.
Yes, we have a question that says, is the vacant lot required to submit this form to the buyer?
Yes, NHD reports are required, first of all, on all sale transactions, including vacant property. And if a buyer is buying vacant land, then they have to understand if home hardening or defensible space laws exist, because they may have the intention to build on the property. So they need to understand if these laws will affect any potential structures that they put on the property, or they may even move a single wide trailer onto the property or anything like that. So a great question.
Yes. And the links that, and this is my question, I didn't post it right now, I just thought about it. The links that are posted throughout your PowerPoint is, well, this program is recorded so that everybody can have a copy of all those links available to us. Okay, and what else? Is there any other questions you have on the chat that you want to post now? Because this is our time to be able to get those answers. Okay, otherwise, that was it.
Just remember.
And I thank you very much. I thank you, Sage, and I thank you, Scott, very much. Any other comments you have for us, Scott? Sorry.
I was just gonna say for all of you, you know, the law is new. You're a listing agent. If you get a property that's, you know, you order the NHD report and it says AB 38 yes, and you have questions, just reach out to Sage. She can get a hold of any of us to help you with any of those questions, and we'll walk you through it. So, but what I want to make sure is that you don't close a transaction without the new CAR form if it's required. We want to avoid that at all costs. So if you're not sure about whether a property qualifies for AB 38 and the new disclosures, the new CAR form, just ask us and we'll help you.
I think that's
Thank
so
you very
important
much.
because the new form is technically a contract. So NHD, it's just a disclosure, but with this new form, it's leading you into a contract between the seller and the buyer. So that's why it's so important to get that information up front. And I think someone else has a question in the chat.
Yes,
Sure.
One new question from Joseph Yan. Since there are many NHD reports providers, without considering the price of the report, are you one of the NHD providers that has the most complete, comprehensive reports?
That's a great question, and absolutely yes, right? Look, all the data is publicly available, so it's just a matter of, you know, is the NHD company willing to spend the time and money to include everything that's required now? The local data is so important, right? These local fire zones, fire maps that are at the city and county level. In addition, the local flood zones, the local seismic zones. It takes time and effort to incorporate those into your report. We have all of them. We are as comprehensive a report that is available on the market, and we've never had a claim against us for any of our reports. And we are one of the largest report providers in the industry. Great question.
Yes. One other question from Winton Wing. Are your services statewide or local only?
Not only are we statewide, we're actually national. We're one of the only national providers of this disclosure information, but absolutely we are statewide, all 58 counties. You can get a My NHD report anywhere in the state of California. And if you happen to move somewhere else, you can get a My NHD report in any of the 48 states, continuous states in the country.
Great. And they're saying thank you, and we thank you as well. It was a wonderful experience hearing from all that. This is all new to all of us, you know, and we have to deal with it starting July 1st, so we better be prepared because here it comes.
And just remember, effective January 1st, the home hardening piece of this is in effect. So any
Yes.
property in a high fire hazard zone, you have to pay attention to. So,
Yes.
and
Yes.
by the way, thank you for having us. It was our pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Scott.
There's a few more questions I see popping up.
Yes. Okay. Whom should we contact to order the reports?
Contact Sage, absolutely.
I'm your rep for this specific area. However, we all work together. If I need help with a specific question, I needed help with environmental the other week, I go to Scott for something like that. We all work together as a team, but for your specific area, you would contact me. So I'm going to put my information in the chat, but also with the West San Gabriel board, you can get my information from the new app that they've provided or the website, but I will put my information in the chat.
Okay. And Pauline asked a question. Which states are require the NHD disclosures?
So it's a great question. The NHD report that we provide in California, this is the only state where the actual NHD reports exist, but the disclosures like flood disclosures, environmental disclosures, fire disclosures, they exist throughout California, and there's specific state forms that require them. So we actually just bundle that information in a nice compact report and provide it to anybody who requests it.
Great. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn over the screen, the monitor to Pauline. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sage, Scott, and Sylvia for this wonderful time to give us so important message starting from July 1st, what we need to pay attention as an agent, right? Disclosure for fire and high fire zone. So important message brought from my NHD, Sage Gomez and Scott Rockline. Thank you so much. On behalf of West San Gabriel Valley Realtors, we would like to really sincere thank you for your knowledge and your expertise and your sharing with our board member and all the fellow realtors. I would like to remind you, next Tuesday, we have another good classes. It's a YPN and Education Committee co-host together for how to effectively use social media to boost business. And this will be very great class. And in all the classes, you just simply register at wsgvar.com, click the education schedule. And one important paid class happened on June 23rd, Wednesday, a one-day class, SFR, short sale and foreclosure. This class is certified by NAR. You only need to pay $59 for our member, non-member $79. Refresher is only $25. And don't forget the June 29th, 10:30, tune in this classroom. Attorney Dennis Block will come back to talk to us about moratorium extension or not, right? So the topic is very interesting. Are we seeing the end of the Tenant Relief Act? I want to invite not only all of you spread over all these good classes with your coworker and your realtor friends, not only in our board, even though in Tri-County or the Irvine area, everywhere, invite them. We still get advantage and take benefit for our board. Free Zoom classes present to you by West San Gabriel Valley Realtors Education Committee. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all. And we want to see you next Tuesday, 12 noon for the social media class. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Sage, and thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Fong. Thank you, all of you. We see you.